My name's Jim Fletcher. I'm a Beef Extension Officer in Mackay/Cloncurry. I cover a little bit of country, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in this pea availability project, which contributed to helping supplement or amend some of the holes that we have in our phosphorus map, which is the topic of this entire day. Fortunately for you, you got the dumb bloke first, but I guess the only way is up from here. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background as to the why. If anybody's ever heard Simon Sinek talk, he's got a few books. He talks about a lot of leadership and management. He talks about you've got to find the why. So I think it's important before we start to talk about this P map that we developed is why we done it in the first place. I'll start off with a statement. Developing an efficient phosphorus supplementation program one that works is always good. On phosphorus deficient country in the northern parts of Queensland is a cost positive exercise. I'll limit it to Queensland for the moment because I'm DPI, but probably across Australia there's issues with P deficiency wherever we go. You know, there's been a lot of, or not a lot, but there's been quite a few good regional economic summaries done of the north. It's a tricky part of the world to raise cattle and to a profit, and you know our cost positive exercises may be a little bit more limited than our fairer cousins down south. But outside of that, two rules apply to that statement that I've made. Rule number one being able to determine if your operation is P deficient or P adequate. Maybe not even just your operation, maybe parts of your operation may be P deficient. Maybe there's enough adequacy in the operation to get your cattle through, and if you were to supplement with P, you wouldn't see an animal performance change. But I guess that's the reasoning behind the P map, or from my perspective it is anyway. And probably the main rule we're going to venture into today. Rule number two is obviously getting enough P into them, getting that intake. We can know they're deficient. We can have some good brews to stick into them and get that phosphorus into those bovines, because we know that's pretty high standard of currency with them for growth and milk production. But obviously there's the management issues relating to that. Things like just feeding supplement in the wet in general, but getting it out, maintaining intakes, shelter, having a good quality P supplement, one that's got plenty of phosphorus available, is also pretty important. So for the second rule, I guess I'll just have a brief soiree into the second rule for all management implications, and for trying to avoid as many potholes as possible. There's quite a lot of good technical documents out there available to people on the internet. And the phosphorus management of beef cattle in northern Australia is an excellent MLA publication. Even the old book's pretty good, really. It's just a bit outdated, I suppose. Some of the economics and some of the case studies are a bit old. But it was redone by MLA. They put a bit of time into getting it rejudged. I think it was last year, actually, they did that. So there's a new version of that, and you'll find that on the MLA Phosphorus Hub, which is a web page that's specifically been created to help people understand this phosphorus issue, if they do or don't have it, and if they do have it, how to manage it better. Future Beef has a lot of different publications, articles, fact sheets, case studies. There's even a couple of podcasts. If you're a podcaster, you like to drive around checking waters, listen to podcasts, there's a few podcasts available on how to better manage phosphorus. I was talking about the economics before. Bowen and Chudley, along with Joey Rolfe and Bernie English, did a bit of a regional economic summary of the Northern Gulf beef production systems, what's profitable, what's not profitable for the DCAP project, Drought and Climate Adaptation Program. And if you're looking at for the numbers behind the viability of phosphorus supplementation, there's a bit of good work there. If you'd like to create your own figures bespoke to your own business, there's also the breed count dilemma economic options analysis program that is freely available and you can access on the internet. Just got to get onto the website and make a username. Also, for all things in relation to phosphorus supplementation inside and outside of phosphorus, urea, every other deficiency and nutritional issue that we might have all around Queensland, there's a dry season management of the beef business book. A couple of old DPI fellas, last time it was called DPI, put in to put this guide together, and DCAT's put a bit of money in and they've given it a rehash as well. So that's a really good book. There's a lot of practical stuff in there in terms of supplementation, grazing land management, pasture budgeting, anything that you'd like to learn about is in that book. So you can download that off the Future Beef website also. So we'll get into it. So this is a bit of tongue in cheek, obviously, but this is the old soil bicarbonate extractable phosphorus or coal P map that we used to have. Yeah, if you lived in the Gulf, in the southern and northern Gulf, it probably didn't do you a real lot of value. We can see there's a bit of interest down there around the dress circle outside of Rockhampton, a bit in the Delta, in the Channel country, a bit on that basalt country, and then can be variable in between. But obviously, quite a few brave soil scientists have ventured into the Gulf and never been seen again. So we changed it up a little bit this time. We got some extension officers to come and do the soil testing instead. We must look up a little bit more or be a bit flighty, but we've done our best to try and patch that big white hole. One of the reasons why we think it's worth, I guess another why as to why we think it's worthwhile doing is because there's a lot of cattle in that part of the world, and they sit on a lot of variable sort of production systems. Some of the country up there is pretty tough and takes a lot of good management. Some of it's a bit easier or you know, maybe a bit more productive, but there's a lot of cattle up there and there's a lot of cattle that come out of there. Obviously, a lot of cattle that go up into boats for live export, growing cattle that come into the southeast for feeding and slaughter there. Some of the cattle that come out are ready for slaughter on the better country. And obviously, you've got a lot of cull cows coming out for both those as well. But a lot of different production systems and variability in production potential across there. And a lot of cattle that need some good looking after. So that's the reason why we think that good management of P is probably a good idea, or at least being able to assess your P status. So what goes into identifying your phosphorus status? Well, there's a lot of different things. A good word for it is holistic. Obviously, that's a word that's been used for various things in our industry in the past, but let's try and get our information from a lot of different sources. That improves the accuracy. Obviously, your first time beef cattleman coming to the Southern Gulf and the Northern Gulf, the first thing you're probably going to do, if you're smart enough, managing a place or own a place, is to talk to the local knowledge. The fellows have been doing it pretty good for a long time. What are they doing with phosphorus through the wet? If they're on a similar type of country to you. There's a lot of good tools that we have now that can assess the various land types on our lot and plans on our areas. Long paddock and Grant Stone's going to talk a bit about long paddock in far better depth and accuracy than I will today. But there's a land type mapping that you can download from the long paddock that gives you a pretty good assessment of the different types of country you got on your place. You know, we live in a really ancient environment. Weathering has been undertaken here for millions of years. And so all those resources like phosphorus have tended to move down the topography and are caught in the silt, in the sediment, in the lower reaches of the landform. So if you know what those P adequate land types are and what the P deficient ones are, that's pretty useful. Obviously, if you've got a lot of P deficient country that's also broken up into paddocks, singular paddocks with no access to a P resource, that could heighten the deficiency risk in those paddocks. So overlaying those land types on a shapefile of your property maps is probably a useful thing to do. Once you get that variability in land types and potential P issues, possibly going out doing a few soil tests, it's a pretty coarse way of, obviously the way that we've done it as well, but it's a coarse way of assessing that phosphorus reserve, and the test that we use at the moment is Colwell P. And then once you've sort of got a bit of an idea, at this stage, probably the best way to do it is to combine some, get a vet out or somebody who's able to do it for a blood, plasma, inorganic phosphorus and fecal NIR testing on a group of cattle. Generally when P is not the limiting nutrient, so at the end of the wet season when cattle are doing pretty well, when protein and energy isn't so much of an issue, and also on growing cattle, obviously because that bovine is pretty good animal for sourcing P and then resynthesizing it back out of its skeleton. So you really need to have it tested in those growing cattle. Animal health and performance. Now this is obviously, this works both ways. Animal health, if we have really chronically deficient P, then we are going to have some animal health issues like bone chewing, pegged leg, snapping necks in yards, all these sorts of things that indicate to our local knowledge that there's some pretty deficient P country around the place. A good baseline of performance on that country is very useful, because once you start to supplement P, you can see what the response is, and you can put that into your own economic analysis and see whether it's worthwhile you doing it. The other problem that we have is that we have a lot of country in the landscape, not just in Northern Australia, but in all parts around Queensland that you'd probably call marginal. So maybe it's deficient, maybe it isn't. And having a better idea of what your current performance is and what you might be able to garnish from some good P supplementation is probably just as useful. Okay, so not only do these different factors that combine to P status help to improve our certainty around our P status, but they help to improve the accuracy of each other. And I'll just include the P map in that as a specific example. I think they all help one another. But the P map, now we've got this P map come along, that's going to really help combine, especially from us, from my perspective as extension staff, to help and communicate that variation in phosphorus by the land types. It'll hope improve our overall local knowledge. Obviously, all of these things will as we go along. Year after year, we all hopefully help to improve our local knowledge, but the PMAP will definitely help that. It'll help us allocate areas that we might want to do a soil test, and it'll help us identify paddocks that we think may be phosphorus deficient, that we can go into, start to do some animal health and performance baseline records, and then also do the testing. So that's the background, guys. I guess that's my perspective as to why I think these maps are a pretty good thing. Now in a little bit of the ground truthing work. So this is, I guess, I'm going to just talk about some of the blunt object type stuff, and Stephen's going to help define a lot of the reasoning and the science behind the methodology that we placed on this project in terms of the sampling. So Stephen Leo provided us with this excellent georeference PDF map. This is the map of the Southern Gulf region. People from that area obviously will know this map. Georeference PDF, you stick that straight into a Venza. Most cattlemen these days start and become acutely aware of what a Venza is. It's an excellent map mapping software system where you can stick some georeference PDFs with some shape files of fence lines and roads and stuff over the top, and you know, ringers don't get lost. Everyone knows where they're going. Well, we want to get lost too if we didn't have a good map like this. I'll just zoom in a little bit more. Obviously, there's those yellow and blue splotches that on the map. This is Burke and Rills Road, Three Ways Road, just north of Cloncurry. Stephen made it really simple for us. Basically, we drive down the road. When the marker moves over those blue splotches, those are kind of like the optimal areas, given his methodology of where to sample for phosphorus. Now, if we come along one of those blue polygons, and there was a big gully or a set of cattle yards or a trough or something like that, then we'd move on to the secondary sites, those being the yellow polygons. We'd also supplement the data within the blue polygons with additional soil tests if we could from the yellow areas. So pretty simple methodology, and definitely no different to what you normally do if you do a soil test anywhere else. Minimum 10 samples taken from each site and amalgamated into a single sample for testing. We focused on that 0 to 10 centimeters soil horizon, and we tried to sample that within a 20 to 20 meter quadrant. It was challenging to keep within that size area in a couple of places, like the soft spinifex hills in the Southern Gulf region. They're pretty skeletal soils, and it's pretty hard to try and get, if you can get a bit of topsoil in places, you're doing pretty well. With georeference aside, obviously with the WGS84, it's pretty standard form of GPS that we all use, and then obviously some accompanying images as well. Good landscape photo, good tray-back photo. We also record quite a bit of information with that soil test. The site description, the main pasture composition and health, what was there in the site. We just gave a rough assessment as whether from our perspective, and this is pretty subjective, I suppose, as whether we thought was good, average, or poor country, the ground cover percentage, and if there was any degraded areas nearby. We'd also take some records on the landform, the location in the catchment area, whether it was a mid-slope, a back swamp, clay or loamy alluvials, sandy levees, or a ridgeline. And whether, in terms of drainage, whether it's a recharge or a discharge site, holding up water or letting water go, and whether there'd been a lot of flood activity there recently. We'd also give reference to the soil type, the colour and the texture from what we saw from the site. And we give reference back to the main land types. These land types, if anybody wants to look at these different GLM land types, they're available on the Future Beef website under GLM land types. There's 14 different Southern Gulf land types, and there was 15 Northern Gulf land types. So as an example, that picture in the top right-hand corner, that's a bit of bluegrass brown top plains, so right up in the Gulf, and a little bit of, and the one down the left-hand corner, so dominated by bluegrasses and a bit of Mitchell and brown top and bull Mitchell, stuff like that. Down the bottom left-hand corner, open red country dominated by mainly spinifex. Yeah, so that's an example and a bit of a rough idea on the veg community. If we see a few trees, I don't know about anybody else in the extension people that got around and had a look, but I'm not much of a treeologist, but I will give a bit of a rough guess, and also any weed incursions. So I guess this is what we had to work with to begin with. We had this land type map, and we had a good a good baseline understanding of what the phosphorus reserves were on each of these land types. But it's hard, I guess, to try and communicate this stuff. If you look at that specific example of property A, a lot on plans there, how they interact with a lot of varying land types. There's been channels coming through there, a couple of ridge lines, soft spinifex country ridge lines, but some marshy downs as well, and some frontage country. I guess it's hard to take that and then apply that to a phosphorus deficiency and then also have that conversation. So just to steal Grant's thunder a little bit, but he'll talk more about this. When you start to look at the map based on those deficiencies, based on the ground truthing data we have undertaken, I'm sure you can probably see that makes the conversation a lot easier. So just wrapping up, a few reflections of the work. To me, I believe the PMAP has passed muster so far. I think it's definitely a resource that can be utilised. I would like to see a lot more ground truth, a lot more soil tests added to it, just to increase the accuracy. Once again, just like I noted at the beginning, landform and topography, even when you look at this part of the world as well, it is a key influence on where the P resources lie. But it's still good to identify the variability of P across the regions. And the other thing is, this is just one part of the picture. It pays to not just assume, but to build that holistic picture on P status on your property. A good example of that is 58 parts per million colloidal P at Rivers Lee Station up there on the border. Like that's a pretty healthy phosphorus reserve up there. So there's phosphorus around the place. which can be a good resource to your cattle. And, you know, any management implication that you want to take on your property, you want to make sure that it's going to make you money. So all of this information needs to be collated into your mind to make a good objective decision. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Jim, for giving a bit of an overview of phosphorus and why it's important. So today I'll just be giving a more of an overview of the technical aspects in creating the map across Queensland, specifically around how we selected those soil sites that Jim spoke about, and also the modelling and the mapping process. So this project was actually a MLA funded project over the course of about 12 to 18 months, and it was in collaboration with us here at the Department of Environment, Tourism, Science and Innovation, DETSI, or previously DES, as well as DPI. And the primary aim was, well, there was two aims to this project. One was just updating the existing soil phosphorus mapping. So we did have a fair bit of data that was collected in the last few years since the last map, and then, but more importantly, to extend it into those northern regions, as Jim mentioned. So the objectives here were to firstly just look at what data was available across Queensland, and then look at what gaps there were in the data set, and to go out and collect and analyze those samples, and then update the previous mapping method as things have changed a little bit in the last couple of years. With some new techniques and data sets, and then finally produce a new map across Queensland at a 30-metre resolution. So it's actually increased in resolution from 90 down to 30. And then finally incorporate these into the My Forage reports, which Grant will give an overview of shortly. So firstly, just around the soil site selection for this project. So the idea here was to look at specifically the northern regions first, or primarily the northern regions. So we looked at what were the key variables that were influencing soil phosphorus variability across Queensland by building a preliminary statistical model. And what that model was showing is that factors relating to weathering, radiometrics, which can show variability in geology and soil, as well as some elevation and slope information, were the predominant factors influencing this variability in our model. So we then looked at filtering these data sets to within 100 meters of Queensland's road and track network. So these sites were relatively easy to access. We then used a process to capture the variability across these areas as much as possible. So we used this algorithm called condition latent hypercube sampling, and we allocated about 100 sampling points per region to give a bit of flexibility in terms of how many samples could be taken. So we put 100 samples for the Cape York, the Northern Gulf and the Southern Gulf. And since we were expecting a lot of these samples probably wouldn't be able to be accessed, we used a process called K-means clustering, which kind of grouped the data together based on similar characteristics, so we could kind of get more options around that area. So in the image on the right here, you can see the red site here was the ideal spot to take the sample, but this mapping unit sort of in the green here is the area that's quite similar to that red sampling point. So the next process here was, once all the data had been analyzed, we then extract it from our data sources. So in terms of methods, as Jim touched on as well, we use the bicarbonate extraction method, also known as the Colwell-P, and it's also referred to as the 9B1 or 9B2 lab method code. So since we're mapping the natural phosphorus levels across the state, we wanted to make sure they were only keeping samples in the modeling process that represent that, and also within the topsoil. So we excluded anything that was outside of that 0 to 10 centimeter layer, and then anything that had a concentration above 150 parts per million, which indicates fertilization might have occurred in the past. And if the site was cultivated or highly disturbed. And then by using the Queensland land use mapping, we also eliminated anything that had a somewhat higher concentration than we expected. So we set this level about 7 parts per million. and if it was in about 75 to 100 meters of any sort of areas that might kind of show disturbance or any sort of potential phosphorus applications. So this exclusion process here actually was kept consistent with the old previous map to make sure that we were kind of getting the same sort of process there. So when we extracted all the data across Queensland, we had about 6,800 sites and about 230 new sites were collected as part of this project. I think about 150 or so were sampled, and I think about 70 odd were from looking at old reports and I guess lab records. And what we see here on the right, which is just a graph of the soil phosphorus variability for each grazing land management region, which is the different colors, or you can look at the labels at the bottom. And commonly we see that the Darling Downs is a very high median phosphorus level, but a very large range of variability. When we come to like the Cape York region, as well as the Northern Gulf and the desert uplands, we are getting much lower medium concentrations. Some of the other areas like the Morden area, which is getting a very high amount of variability. So we can expect a fair amount of variation in our predictions from place to place in that area. And then in terms of soil type, we commonly see that the ferrosols had the highest median phosphorus level, about 35 parts per million. And then the calcareosols and the podosols had the lowest median phosphorus levels. And the vertisols, as expected, had a very high range compared to a lot of the other soil types across Queensland. So in terms of the modelling process, we use a technique called digital soil mapping, the same process as what was done in the previous map as well. So this involves building relationships between the observed soil data we have on the ground and some related variables. So there was this framework that was developed and they call it ScorePan. And it's this image on the bottom here, which is basically a formula where you have your soil attribute to be predicted. So in our case, soil phosphorus. And that equals to a function of other soil properties or climate information, vegetation, elevation, topography, geology, weathering, and also locational information. The good thing about this process is that it produces a continuous prediction layer, so you get an estimate every 30 meters, rather than what you typically get with polygons or sort of these mapping units. The good thing about the process as well is that you can generate uncertainty with the prediction, and it's very easy to update with new data. So, I mean, hopefully in the future, once we get more data coming in some of those data poor areas, we can update the map again and provide a better estimation. So the modeling framework here just included the soil data set of those 6,800 sites, and we combine that with the spatial variables that hopefully relate to those soil phosphorus concentrations, integrated into a statistical model, and then spatialized it across Queensland. We also included an optimization process just to make sure that we produce the best map and the predictions across the state. And we ended up testing about 4 different statistical models and about 32 different combinations of spatial variables. I won't go into much detail about that. But we assessed different metrics to see, and these graphs on the right here kind of just show, one of them is just like how well the data fits on a one-to-one line, like how close the predicted and the observed is, and then also how much error. We saw 2 models perform well. Cubis was actually the model used in the previous map, and the quantile random forest model is a new one in this map. And they perform pretty equally in some of the metrics, but in terms of the error in the prediction, the quantile random forest model performed a bit better. So we selected that for this map. And then when we compared the old map to this new map, we were able to improve some of the metrics by between 17 and 48%. And then in the 2022 map, the old map, we looked at the phosphorus categories. So we now have a 7-class system, which Grant will touch on soon. So we had an accuracy of about 28%. So when we're predicting acutely deficient, the observed data is saying that 289 of the sites that we had were accurate, but you do get a fair few sites, probably about 100, saying that they weren't exactly that. And then when you move to the more kind of the crossover line on where the phosphorus supplementation might be required, you do, like around the marginal area, you do get a fair bit of variability of the model predicting inaccurately. As the model as the phosphorus level goes higher, we do get much better predictions in the old map. However, in the new map, we increased the accuracy to 70%. So in the acutely deficient range, we got almost a highly perfect score of almost 100% against the simulated and observed data. And then when we move to the marginal sort of low range, we get much less variability, but we still get a bit of an area where it might cross over to a different category. And as similar to the other model as well, once you get up into the higher ranges, you get much better predictions as well. And just to finish off before I pass it off to Grant to show the new fancy reports. So the prediction uncertainty, which will come with the reports as well, areas typically with naturally high phosphorus levels, or they have a very large range, will generally have a high uncertainty. And areas with low sampling density will also have a high uncertainty if there isn't much confidence in those predictions. And just to note that these maps are only indicative of what the soil phosphorus levels might be. So it's always good to follow up these with additional sampling, as you mentioned, and Grant will go into a bit more detail about this as well. But that's it for me. I'll pass it off to Grant.
Thanks very much, Jim and Stephen, for that coverage of the whys and wherefores and the analyses. So now get on to how do you actually get a report? How do you get the status quo? We're going to go through the forage system. And I know a lot of you have done through this before, but here's the nuts and bolts of how we now represent it. So on the Long Paddock website, up to the forage tab there, or down here on the carousel, will take you to the forage page. In latest on Long Paddock, you'll see there that we relate the new soil phosphorus report. So you can click on that link, it'll take you straight through. And I must say, this has been a very good collaborative process through a number of different funding agencies, DCAP, REEF and MLA, with a lot of cooperation through interdepartmental operators and staff. So currently we have 14 individual forage reports. There they are. I won't go into all of those. We're going to focus today on the soil phosphorus report, which gives you mapping and data tables. As you've seen there before, that Jim showed and Stephen, that's the old map that we had without any data whatsoever. Much to work with for the Gulf and the Cape people. And now we have a full coverage of Queensland. So let's dive into that a little bit further. Our report, once you get it, you'll see this on page 1. We'll have a title. We'll have an introduction. The introduction will relate why we're doing the soil phosphorus report. It is, as Jim has related, the best return on investment for soil phosphorus deficient country, and a little bit about the process there. There's property location for your property there, and you see the little red cross there. Make sure that's in the right location, that everything's worked well as far as you're getting the report. And we'll go on to the soil P map itself. Soil P map has 7 categories as opposed to the 5 categories in the last version. That fits in with a lot of the extension material. Goes from acutely deficient, that's 0 to 4 parts per million, to very high, greater than 25 parts per million. You'll see in green there, the green dots, soil P sample sites that we used for the analyses. they're continually being added to by people contributing their data, or our own research sites offering their samples, as well as reanalyzing information samples that from the past from different programs. There's an overlay of the GLM land types, as Jim's related, to get a handle on how they respond. Now, how do we use this? The best use for is to find exactly what your soil P status is, because from that large map you won't be able to focus in, you won't really be able to get that full map and drill into your location and find it on your area and get around to the paddocks. You can see where the soil sample sites are, if there have been any work on your place, or where you might like to take some samples. It's a spatial view of areas of land types. This is for supplementation, as Jim's related, for stock allocation, and legume potential. Page 2, and for those that want to get right into the details of the data, we've got the soil P categories for the land types. So this will give you the values again for the 7 categories. Then we'll break that up into the land types, so you know exactly those land types by area, from highest to lowest, with a total down the bottom. You then go across to all the different categories. We'll list them by hectare, by the land types, and the percentages. So all the hard work, all the maths is done there for the producers and consultants and extension people. So you can see right across the board the variation that the modelling work has done into those land types, and then we can move across into paddocks in a minute. Our use for those is to rank the country, the areas, the land types, and that's to work out what areas of land types and on your property to pasture improve and allocate stock. Now, Stephen touched on the uncertainty map, so a little bit of focus here. Here's Spyglass, and the title there relates the uncertainty, which relates the confidence of the data of map 1. So there's 5 categories as opposed to the 3 categories that were in the previous version, very low to very high. Low uncertainty, you have more confidence in the data of and the shadings of map 1 on page 1. If it's high uncertainty, you have a lower degree of confidence in that. On the map that we see here, it's a low to moderate degree of uncertainty. So we have got a high certainty of page 1 map being correct. Now, this could be due to an absence of, if you have a higher uncertainty, it could be due to an absence of the soil sampling and data availability. As Stephen said, there's a high variability in land type mixes, or because basically the modelling is fitted towards the lower end of soil P, so that we get the best information down the lower end where you need that value. Now here's another place to give you that contrast. So in the blue here on the left here, there's the page 1 soil map. You can see the very high in blue soil P in basalt soils, and a real hard line here where we see Northern Gulf lower P soils. So if we look over to the right here and we see the soil P data uncertainty, north of the line, hard line here, we have a much lower uncertainty for the Gulf soils, and a little less, a little more uncertainty for the higher soil P. Now, if you've got higher soil P and it's a little bit more uncertain, I'd say that you know, it's a bit of a no-brainer. You're not seeing animals chewing bones or having issues with growth, etc. from there. So you're not looking for the gradations of soil status in those higher areas and along alluvial areas. So how are we going to use the soil P uncertainty map? It's to rate the confidence of the soil P data. And I need to say that you always back up this data with more testing soils, or as Jim related, through inorganic phosphorus testing of the animals before you make large management decisions such as supplement and pasture programs and stock allocation. You really want to make sure what you're doing there. Now, the last bit on the soil P report are the references which relate the project report and material for further reading. As Jim related, a very good adjunct for your practical use now is a GeoPDF. Now, with every soil P report, you will get this accessory file added in the email. It's going to look like this. It's the same map as in page 1. If you open it up onto your screen, it has soil P categories. It has soil P sample sites. It has paddock inclusions there. But you need an application like Avenza to read that in. And once you download that, you can suck those GeoPDFs in. You use those to assess the on-ground property paddock areas, identify extra sample sites, and it's available with other forage reports such as ground cover reports, our FBC woody cover report, fire scar reports. And it is really good to have that on your device to be able to travel around and very accurate to look into the landscape, the land types, the soil types, and the your soil P. Note there's no legend. You need to have a hard copy with you to look at that legend, or have the PDF report open on your device so you can switch there and know exactly what those shadings are. Now you say, how do I get those paddocks onto my property? Well, another great tool in the long paddock forage lineup is the My Forage online property mapper. You open that tool up, you'll be able to import property or paddock shape files if you already have those, or you can draw your own property boundaries or establish that lot on plan, your boundaries into paddocks with the tools that are there. It's a pseudo GPS GIS approach. You can add waters and exclusion zones. You can cut off mine sites or areas that animals don't graze. You can show changes of land types, pasture species, and land condition there that will assist our modelling. You can start another project up and do a what-if scenario. Save that project. You can export those files as shape files or KMLs that can be used in other programs. Best thing is you can order all those forage reports direct from that report, from that program, and you will be able to get the representation of the paddocks on those reports that have images. You'll also get a PDF, GeoPDF, that will relate those paddocks for those attributes. And if you want to watch the video and view the guides, that's the front page of the screen there of the video. Now, so you want to get that report. This is how you do it. Go to the forage tab. You can see up there, we'll take you through to this screen. On the left-hand side there, you'll have all the different reports that you can read up about the reports. Have a look at the report example. And on the main section here, you've got drop-down menus. Order as many reports as you like. This time it's just the phosphorus report. Specify the location, the lot on plan if you know it. If you don't, you can put your property name in here or the road address. It will take it up, or simply select the property from the map, click around, add those lots on plan. Put your email address in, your property name label, submit that, and you'll get a message up like this that says you've submitted it successfully. To date, our progress for the soil P report, well, we first brought this out in December 22. So it's been around for a little while now. It's been highly successful because we've sent out over 2,500 reports to date. In the last quarter, 390, and the new version of the soil P was brought out just before Christmas in December. We have a customer focus. There were 70 odd reports of requests, and we held off for the Gulf and Peninsula that weren't available. We held on to those, and we've delivered those now. And for your awareness, it'd be a good idea if you got the new report, even though if you got the old ones, request a new report and just see what the new modelling has done into the new categories and the new uncertainty, and you'll get a GeoPDF as well. For soil P information, see the FAQs, frequently asked questions, and there's new DCAP fact sheets there that relate some of the information that Jim mentioned into a simple 2-page fact sheets, which might be about grazing management strategies to improve your drought resilience, and oversowing native pastures with stylos with phosphorus. This is a location of those reports, but Greg will relate those links back to you post-processing of the webinar. While I've got the floor here, here's a few new and in development aspects of forage. With a number of reports, carrying capacity and ground cover, if you've put your paddocks and your water points in your My Forage, we'll relate those water points onto the map here. Very useful to have a look at your low and high ground cover points there. In the fire scar report, we've gone back in history now, and we've changed from 1987 to 2017. We've changed that to go from MODIS, which is quite coarse, to Landsat data series, which is 30 meters. So if you look at the image in the top there, a location around Ralston, a lot of patches there of the frequency of fire across a number of years. If we look at the screen down the bottom there, there's been a lot more infill there of fires, and that's because there's more historical fires visible and smaller fires are now mapped. So that's great for looking at how often the country has been treated with fire. Onto our crop frequency report, we've been able to include individual crops for summer, which for this property around Emerald has a cotton crop, but we do banana and sugarcane and the miscellaneous now for summer, and in winter we can break this into cereal crops and chickpea. In addition to that, you get satellite images there for 10 years for twice yearly. So February on the left and September on the right, and those little white patches there are water bodies, and that can help you pick out those there. You'll also get a time series plot of the proportion of area cropped, and so you'll see down here on the left hand side the greenness of the summer crops here, and the right hand side are the winter crops, and you've got the greenness here in one winter year that might have been oats in that area. An expanded area of Queensland, so we include much more of the north here, and the coast here that wasn't available previously. In development, we have a seasonal forage budget report, which will relate your capacity to have current biomass and a forecast of growth with a threshold of biomass or ground cover, to relate how many animals that you might be able to run in that shorter period there. So a real good little tool that's going to be to back up your gut feel about an indication of sustainable stocking. We are using artificial intelligence analyses. There's a field program that is in association with that, with 4 properties that are in central and northern Queensland. Hopefully, we'll be beta testing that, and it'll be out in the next the final year to be next year. So there's an element of upkeep there and improvement that we're doing with all of our reports. As new information comes to date, we improve and update those reports, and that's to deliver the best quality information to you, the user. So for requesting your forage soil phosphorus property report, you click on any of those links there, go through to the Long Paddock website, and remember, it's all free. And now that's question time for us, the panel. Thanks, Greg.